One day, my quiet street became a battleground. The HOA, power-hungry and relentless, claimed my road, my own driveway, without a word. They thought they could bully me into submission, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Heart-pounding, I planned my revenge in the dead of night. By morning, every single one of their cars was gone, vanished without a trace. Their smug faces turned to panic, but I wasn't done yet. How far would you go to protect what's yours? Stick around to find out how one homeowner turned the tables on a ruthless HOA. The sun dipped low over Willow Creek, a tidy suburban neighborhood where every lawn was manicured and every mailbox matched. For years, I called this place home, modest two-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. My days were simple: morning coffee on the porch, tinkering in the garage, waving to neighbors who knew my name. I'd built a life here, pouring savings into every brick, every shingle. The gravel driveway stretching from my garage to the street wasn't just a path. It was mine, paid for, cherished. Willow Creek felt like a haven, but beneath the surface, the HOA ruled with an iron grip. Their monthly newsletters preached community standards, but I noticed their clipboard-wielding president, Karen, eyeing my property more than most. Her sharp glances lingered on my driveway, the one I'd laid out for myself, the one that didn't quite match their vision of uniformity. I shrugged it off, live and let live, right? But a letter arrived one crisp autumn day, tucked into my mailbox like a ticking bomb. It wasn't a request or a warning. It was a demand, stamped with the HOA seal. I'd always kept to myself, avoiding their petty politics. I wasn't one for meetings where neighbors bickered over fence heights or mailbox colors. My life was my work, my home, my sanctuary. But as I read that letter, my stomach twisted. The HOA claimed my driveway wasn't mine at all. They called it community property. They wanted to pave it, control it, without so much as asking. My haven was under siege, and I hadn't even seen it coming. Something stirred in me, a quiet resolve. This wasn't just about gravel or land. It was about everything I'd built. The letter sat on my kitchen counter like a coiled snake. Its words seared into my mind. My driveway, the one I'd spent a year's savings to build, was now community property. The Willow Creek HOA claimed it extended 6 inches beyond some obscure boundary line they dug up from a decades-old survey. They didn't ask for permission or offer compensation. They demanded I surrender it for repaving to match their aesthetic standards. I stared out my window at the gravel path, each stone laid with my own hands, and felt a slow burn in my chest. This wasn't just about a driveway. It was about control. I tried reasoning first. I knocked on Karen's door, her house screaming perfection, down to the regulation-approved mailbox. I held the letter, keeping my voice calm, explaining the driveway was on my deed, paid for mine. She barely looked at me, her eyes cold as she rattled off bylaws like scripture. "The community comes first," she said, shutting the door. The next day, a fine arrived, $200 for non-compliance. I paid it, thinking it'd buy time. It didn't. The HOA's demands escalated like a storm-gathering force. Another letter arrived, threatening legal action if I didn't allow surveyors onto my property. I called a lawyer, a gruff man who charged by the minute. He confirmed my deed was solid, but warned that HOAs could drown you in fees and lawsuits. "They'll bleed you dry," he said. I hung up, my savings already thin. Then came the workers' men in orange vests marking my driveway with spray paint, their machines idling like predators. I stood in their way, heart pounding, and told them to leave. They smirked, pointing to Karen watching from across the street, her clipboard in hand. By week 3, the fines piled up $500, then $1,000. My mailbox overflowed with violation notices. My driveway was unsightly, my resistance disruptive to community harmony. Neighbors started whispering. Old Mrs. Jenkins, who'd always waved, now avoided my gaze. At the grocery store, a guy from 2 streets over muttered, "Just give in, man. It's easier." But giving in meant letting them erase what I'd built. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with the unfairness of it all. The HOA wasn't just after my driveway. They wanted to break me. I started digging into their rules, spending nights poring over bylaws on their website. The fine print was a maze, but I found cracks. The survey they cited was outdated, contradicted by my property records. I sent a certified letter demanding proof, citing their own regulations. No response. Instead, Karen escalated. One morning, I woke to find my driveway roped off with caution tape, a notice declaring it under HOA review. Neighbors drove by, gawking like it was a crime scene. I tore the tape down, my hands shaking, but the message was clear. They wouldn't stop. The tension spiked when Karen held an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, but I showed up, standing in the back of the community center. The room buzzed with neighbors, some nodding as Karen spoke about maintaining property values. She painted me as the villain, a stubborn loner defying the greater good. I stepped forward, voice steady, and read from my deed, proving the driveway was mine. Karen's smile didn't falter. "We'll handle this legally," she said, dismissing me. As I left, a neighbor whispered, "You're making it worse." Worse for whom? Days later, a process server knocked. The HOA was suing me for obstructing community improvements. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, thousands in potential costs, liens on my home. I felt the walls closing in, my sanctuary slipping away. But something else stirred a spark of defiance. They thought I'd cave, but they didn't know me. I'd spent years fixing up this house, fighting for every inch of it. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. The final straw came when I found survey stakes driven deep into my driveway, red flags flapping like a taunt. A new letter announced construction would begin in 48 hours. My gravel would be ripped up, replaced with their sterile asphalt. I stood there, dusk settling, and realized reasoning was pointless. They didn't care about right or wrong. They cared about power. My mind churned, plotting. I wasn't a lawyer or a politician, but I knew this neighborhood, every street, every corner. And I knew cars. That night, I sat in my garage, staring at the tools lining the walls. An idea took root, wild and reckless, but it felt right. The HOA thought they could roll over me, but they'd forgotten one thing. This was my home, my ground. As the moon rose, I started planning, my pulse racing with purpose. The air was thick as the sun sank below Willow Creek's horizon, casting shadows across my driveway. The HOS deadline loomed 48 hours until their bulldozers would tear up my gravel, erasing years of my sweat and savings. The red stakes stood like sentinels, mocking me. I'd tried reasoning, I'd tried the law, but the HOA, led by Karen's unyielding smirk, was a machine that crushed dissent. My home, my sanctuary, was slipping through my fingers. But I wasn't done. That night, I made a choice, not to fight their game, but to change the board entirely. I knew Willow Creek like the back of my hand. Every street, every driveway, every car parked under the Us watchful eye. Karen's SUV, the treasurer's convertible, the secretary's minivan with its Community First sticker, they were all pieces in my plan. I wasn't a criminal, just a man pushed too far. In my garage, surrounded by tools and the smell of motor oil, I mapped it out. They thought they could take what was mine without consequence. They were about to learn how wrong they were. At 2 a.m., the neighborhood slept in silence. I moved like a shadow, dressed in black, my heart pounding but my hands steady. I'd spent years fixing cars, towing rigs, and navigating the back roads of this town. That knowledge was my weapon. One by one, I targeted the HOA board's vehicles, 7 in total, parked in their driveways like trophies of their power. I didn't steal or destroy. I was surgical. Using a towhook and a borrowed flatbed from a friend's shop, I relocated each car to a private lot on the edge of town, a place no one would think to look. By dawn, every board member's driveway was empty, and their cars vanished without a trace. The morning brought chaos. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, as Karen stormed out, her face pale as she stared at her empty driveway. The treasurer paced, phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising in panic. Neighbors gathered, whispering, pointing at the barren spots where cars once stood. The HOA siren grip had faltered, and I felt a surge of vindication. They'd taken my road, my peace. Now I'd taken something of theirs. But I wasn't just playing pranks. I'd left a note under Karen's windshield wiper still sitting in her driveway, untouched. Return my driveway or your cars stay gone. The HOA's response was swift and furious. By noon, Karen and the board marched to my house, their faces a mix of rage and fear. Karen clutched the note, her voice trembling as she demanded answers. Where are they? She shouted, neighbors watching from their lawns. I stood calmly, arms crossed, and said nothing. I'd covered my track security cameras disabled, the lot untraceable. They had no proof, no leverage. For the first time, Karen's clipboard seemed useless, her authority crumbling under her own panic. The real climax came at the emergency HOA meeting that evening. The community center was packed, the air buzzing with gossip. Karen stood at the podium, calling the car disappearances vandalism and me a threat to harmony. I'd had enough. I walked to the front, holding my deed and the outdated survey they'd used against me. My voice was steady as I laid out the truth. The HOA had no legal claim to my driveway. Their survey was flawed, their fines predatory, their lawsuit a bluff. ID hired a new lawyer, one who worked pro bono for cases like mine, and V filed a counterclaim exposing their overreach. The room fell silent as I turned to Karen. You thought you could bully me into submission, I said, my words cutting through the tension. But you picked the wrong fight. Then I dropped the bombshell. ID reported the missing cars to the police as misplaced, hinting I'd return them once the HOA dropped their claim. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors who'd stayed quiet started murmuring, their eyes shifting to Karen. Her face flushed red, her composure cracking as she stammered, "This is outrageous." But the tide had turned, her power was slipping, and everyone could see it. The air in Willow Creek buzzed with a new energy after that meeting. The neighborhood, once a grid of conformity, felt like a chessboard where I'd flipped the board. The HOA, led by Karen's faltering grip, was on its heels. My counterclaim, backed by a lawyer who relished taking on petty tyrants, had exposed their shaky legal ground. The outdated survey they'd used was crumbling, and the missing cars still hidden in that lot kept the pressure on. I'd turned their game of control into one of consequences, and the neighborhood was watching. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from my lawyer. The HOA's lawsuit was collapsing. Their legal team, faced with my counterclaim and evidence of their overreach, urged them to settle. By noon, a letter arrived not in the usual HOA envelope, but from a law firm. They offered to drop all claims to my driveway, cancel the fines, and pay my legal fees. In exchange, they wanted their cars back. I stood in my kitchen, reading the words, feeling a weight lift. It wasn't just a victory, it was vindication. But I wasn't ready to let them off easily. I'd fought too hard. I met Karen and the board at the community center that evening, my lawyer by my side. The room was smaller this time, just the board and a few curious neighbors. Karen's smugness was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. I laid out my terms. They'd drop their claim and fines, issue a public apology at the next HOA meeting, and revise their bylaws to prevent this kind of overreach. My lawyer slid a document across the table, detailing the lot where their cars waited safe, untouched, but out of reach until they signed. The treasurer's eyes widened, and the secretary shifted uncomfortably. Karen hesitated, her pen hovering, but the board's murmurs pushed her. She signed, her hand trembling. The cars were returned that night, towed back in the darkness. By morning, driveways were full again, but the HOA's authority was not. At the next meeting, Karen stood before a packed room and read the apology, her voice flat, each word forced. Neighbors whispered, some nodding in approval, others staring at me with awe and unease. My driveway remained untouched, its gravel gleaming under the sun, a symbol of what I'd fought for. The HOA's power, once ironclad, now felt fragile, questioned by those who'd once bowed to it. The neighborhood began to shift. Mrs. Jenkins, who'd avoided me, knocked on my door with cookies and a quiet, "Thank you." Others followed. Neighbors who'd stayed silent started speaking up at meetings, challenging petty rules about fence colors or lawn ornaments. A new board member, a retired teacher who'd watched the saga, ran for election and won, promising transparency. Karen didn't run again. Her clipboard was gone, her SUV parked less proudly. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was waking up, the fog of compliance lifting. I spent weeks reflecting. My home was mine again, but the fight had changed me. I'd been a quiet man, content to tinker in my garage. Now, I was the guy who'd vanished 7 cars and humbled an HOA'd neighbors, waved differently, some with respect, others with caution. I didn't care. I'd learned that power thrives on silence, and I'd broken that silence. My lawyer, grinning over coffee, told me the HOA's legal fees had cost them thousands, a dent that forced them to scrap plans for more improvements. Good. The impact stretched beyond Willow Creek. A local news blog dubbed me The driveway rebel. It wasn't the fame I wanted, but it sparked chatter online, other homeowners sharing their HOA horror stories, some asking for my lawyer's number. My fight wasn't just mine, it was a spark for others. I started attending HOA meetings not to stir trouble, but to keep them honest. My presence made the board fidget, a reminder of what happens when you push too far. Looking back, I saw the cost, not just the fines, the sleepless nights, or the legal wrangling, but the toll on my peace. I'd won, but at the expense of my quiet life. Yet, I'd do it again. My driveway wasn't just gravel. It was a line in the sand, a stand for what was mine. The HOA had underestimated me, thinking their rules could bend me. They'd learned that some things, home, pride, justice, aren't easily taken. As I sat on my porch months later, the neighborhood quieter now, I watched the sunset paint the sky orange. My driveway stretched out before me, unchanged, unyielding. I thought about the cars, the chaos, the moment I'd flipped the script. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. And I reminded Willow Creek that power isn't given, it's earned, and it's fought for. What would you do if someone tried to take what you'd built? Would you bend, or would you fight until the world knew your name?